everyone. So I wanted to talk today about the books that I read in the second half of February. I did do a February mid-month wrap-up, so I'll link that down below. And if you watched that one, you know I had a pretty mediocre reading the first half of the month, and that continued into the second half. I didn't have any 5-star reads the entire month. I did have a couple 4 stars. And I did have like 3 stars that I enjoyed, but 3 stars is still kind of average. So yeah, like this one I'm telling you, I have a couple 4 stars and then it's all like 3 stars pretty much. So not my strongest reading month, not reading a bunch of favorites. And I'm just going to do them in order from the one I like the best to the one I like the least. But of course the 3 stars, they're all kind of similar, so not necessarily in any order. So the first one is Women in Power by Mary Beard. And this is really short. All this is her putting in print 2 of her lectures. She is a classics professor, but I don't know if she also teaches feminist theory, or I guess it's just a professor of classics. But both of these are about kind of combining, feminism and analysis on the patriarchy and things like that with the classics. So the first lecture that she talks about is about the woman's voice. I think that's what it's called. The public voice of women. And she's going all the way back to the Odyssey and how Penelope has been silenced by her son Telemachus in that story. And just like from that point, it's one of the first things, written down like so long ago, and it is like still a influential text, and just like seeing how the voice of women have been silenced through all of that time. And then and she goes and gives modern examples as well. And then the second lecture is about women in power, and also going back to the classics and into especially the Greek classics, and about how all the women there that had any power were all evil, basically. People like Medusa or Clytemnestra, who ended up not necessarily were all evil, but ended up doing some really horrible things and stuff like that, and are often depicted in a very negative light, and then comparing that to women of power now. And so I thought this was really great. I almost gave it 5 stars, but I think I just wanted a little more because, it is a lecture format. Like, I listened to it, even though I had this little book, I was like, well, since it was originally a lecture, I might as well listen to it. And I did really enjoy hearing it from her and her voice. I really liked her afterword. If you get the physical form, she has an afterword in here, but then she added on after she published and put it in her audiobook another little afterword that is about the Me Too movement, which happened after she had published this. And so I really enjoyed that, and I almost bumped it up to 5 stars, but then I was like, well, that's not actually in the publication, and I don't know if it completely linked to what she was talking about, so I didn't end up going to 5 stars, but I did really enjoy this and would highly recommend it. And if you do read the physical, she puts in a lot of pictures, which I went back through and looked at. Some of them are probably not appropriate for me to show you, but yeah, so there's some like artwork and things that are relating to what she is talking about. So I still really recommend this, especially if you want to listen to it. It's like 1 hour and 45 minutes if you listen to it. Hi, so I'm inserting this clip because I had to return a book to the library. It was overdue, but since illustrations are such a big part of my review for this book, I wanted to make sure to do a little review while I had the book physically before returning it to the library. So I'm just going to insert this in where it belongs in the video. So I am talking about Ramayana, the Divine Loophole by Sanjay Patel. And if you didn't know, the Ramayana is a Sanskrit epic that forms kind of like one of the main parts of Hindu mythology. And so this is a retelling that he did that's kind of targeted towards children. I mean, I think people of all ages can enjoy it, but he's brought the language down and, condensed the story quite a bit in order to be read for a younger audience. I had gotten this from the library originally to read it as part of our school when we were talking about ancient India and Hindu mythology, but my daughter was a little frightened by some of the artwork, like the very beginnings. I mean, this is a story that revolves around a demon, and from the very first page, she got a little scared of the artwork. So we didn't end up reading it together, but I was interested in reading it because I'm going to be reading a more adult version of the Ramayana, like a translated version of it that's, 400 pages long for adults. So I wanted to kind of just a basis of the storyline before I went into that longer version. And I'm really glad I read this because I thought this was a really well done retelling. Obviously, I don't know much about the original, but it was a very interesting done story. I really love the artwork. The author is someone that works for Pixar, I believe. So he works for Pixar. So he is an illustrator and animator and all that stuff. And he's written a couple books that he's illustrated and things like that that are about, I think all of them are about Hindu mythology, all the ones that he has written and illustrated. But the artwork was beautiful. Like even the parts that were, scary are still just so pretty and beautiful. And I just think I love how the different color palettes, like, when it's for like the good guy, it has a very peaceful color palette. And then we're talking about like the demon, it definitely has a darker color palette. And there's just so much. I'm not going to go too far because you don't want to be spoiled for the story. But yeah, as we go along, you'll see just like they're all full spread pages and just like a few paragraphs of text on each page. So it's definitely a condensed story. I gave this 4 stars because I love the artwork, like 5 stars on the artwork. I really enjoyed hearing the story in a very simple way so I could, know all the plot points. But you can definitely tell that there are places where it's been condensed so much down that it felt more like a bullet list than actually like a narrative. And, there's ways to tell like mythology that even if you're shortening down for children that you can still make it sound nice. And I think because he's not like a really experienced author, he's only wrote a few books, and even in his like opening he said he never expected to write a book, but he just is passionate about the mythology he grew up with and things like that I think you can tell some of that like lack of experience in the writing, just because when you're condensing it down, sometimes it didn't really feel like a flowing narrative. But for the most part, I really enjoyed reading this, especially seeing it. It's like I would definitely recommend getting a physical copy so that you can look at those pictures up close. And if you don't know much about Hindu mythology, I would definitely recommend this. Or if you just wanted to be able to like share with someone younger in your life kind of a more condensed story, I would definitely recommend it. It was in our curriculum for first grade, so it is meant for younger children. It's just, different kids will react differently to the artwork about the demon. And my daughter just happened to be scared of it. I think that if she had taken some more time to flip through, she would have been fine. So we might pull it back out next year when she's had a little more experience with different mythologies and things like that. But for the most part, I thought this was really great and would definitely recommend it. And the next one is also a 4-star, but just barely. Like it probably would be a 3.5 if I gave half stars, and that is Ariadne by Jennifer Saint. And it was kind of disappointing because I really want this to be a solid 4 stars because I did think her writing is beautiful, but I think because it's a debut novel, you can see a lot of the issues with pacing and stuff like that. And this is a story of Ariadne from Greek mythology, and she is pretty famous for being a part of the like Theseus and the Minotaur story. And so I think a lot of people go into this thinking that's going to be a big focus, but that's just a tiny bit at the beginning, and then it follows like her life after that event. And I don't want to give anything away if you don't really know what happens to Ariadne after the Minotaur. So it is pretty slow moving because she's choosing in this to really follow Ariadne's point of view and also Ariadne's sister. Now I forgot her name. What is her name? I think it's Phaedra. Yeah, Phaedra. So there is Phaedra's perspective at some points in this too. So she's definitely following the women and not the heroes of the Greek mythology. So, I expect there to be a little more about the like battle with the Minotaur, but there's not because she's not there in that moment when Theseus does that. So we only get her perspectives of that event and also of like the birth of the Minotaur, since the Minotaur is her brother. Yeah, I really, really enjoyed this writing. Like, there were so many times I was just captivated because I read this in like 2 big segments. I read about half of this, and then I stopped to read Circe as a buddy read, which was probably a mistake because these are very similar. I know a lot of people say it's sacrilege to compare this book to Circe. Like, that's what a ton of people said that in their reviews. But I actually thought that they were extremely similar in the way they were written, and the same things I didn't like about Circe, I didn't like about this one. The same things I liked about Circe, I liked about this one. So I actually think they're very similar, someone that read them at the exact same time. But that was a little bit of a mistake, because then I was like, well, now do I really want to go back to this one? Because I've already heard a lot of the story of Ariadne. But then I was like, okay, I didn't really hear all of her stories. So I came back to this like a month later, and I thought it's going to take a lot to get back into it. But no, as soon as I started reading it, I flew through the second half of this book in one night, because I just think her writing is so nice. And so I'm looking forward to her next book, because the thing I didn't like about this is the reason I stopped in the middle was for that buddy read, but also because it was really dragging in the middle. I think the pacing has some problems. The whole middle just really bogs down the story. The first third is great. The last third was great, but that middle part just really slowed it down. And I think you have to approach this seeing it's a character study, and then it's not going to have focus on action. There's hardly any action scenes in it, and what action scenes there are often like glossed over, because she might not be in the moment. You know, so there's like the Minotaur part, but then there's also other parts later in her life where she's not at the action, but she's hearing it from a distance, or relating what's happening. So it's not a plot focused book. But I do really like what both this and Circe are like kind of talking about like looking at these women that might be seen as such a small part of the myth, but what they would have been like, you know, what their viewpoint of these heroes and the like gods and things like that are like, you know, idolized in the Greek myths and stuff like that, like what they would actually see them as. And so seeing it from their point of view, and seeing that the women in these myths are really at the whim of the men in their lives, no matter what kind of power they have or beauty or any of these things, that they really just have to go along with, whether it's their father or, you know, their husband or whatever. They're just kind of like not able to follow what they want to do. So I do like the themes of both of them, but the pacing was a little off, so I gave it a low 4. Like, it's just sneaking into a 4, but I'll definitely read what she writes next. Then we're moving into my 3-star reads, so there was a lot of those. First one was the play I read this month, which was Pygmalion by George Bernard Shaw, and this is the original text that My Fair Lady is based off of, the musical, which I loved growing up. And I think the problem with this is that I loved My Fair Lady so much and have watched it so many times and was like obsessed with it as a young person, that this just isn't as robust, because it's a pretty short play, and compared to the fleshed out story of My Fair Lady, it felt very bare bones, but it's following the exact same things. There's like scenes in this that have been transported exactly word for word into My Fair Lady, so it was very much based off of this. And if you don't know, Pygmalion is about a linguist professor who makes a bet that he can like turn this woman who has a really heavy Cockney accent, I believe she has, and turn her into a proper lady and pass her off as a duchess after several months of working on just her voice and like, you know, giving her nice clothes and things like that. And it's called Pygmalion because it's supposed to be slightly based off of the Greek myth of Pygmalion and Galatea, where Pygmalion sculpts, you know, makes a sculpture of a woman and then falls in love with her. So that's kind of what this is supposed to be based off as well. And yeah, I did really like a lot of the dialogue. I really enjoyed myself a lot of the times. But I don't really love the ending of this. I don't like the ending of My Fair Lady either. I think both stories don't have a really satisfying ending to me. But then also what brought this down is that I guess later on, I don't know how much after writing it, he added a like epilogue, and it was in this, and like the epilogue I really hated. And so I don't know if I shouldn't rate that as part of the play because it was a later edition, because I think I probably would have given the play 4 stars if I hadn't read that epilogue, but I just like really hate, because it basically is the playwright telling us what happens to all the characters after the end of the play, and I really didn't like that. Yeah, so this could be a 4-star if I just pretend I didn't read that epilogue, because I do like a lot of the like dialogue and things like that. But I think just the problem is that I watched and was obsessed with My Fair Lady first, and so this couldn't quite live up to that because of having such fond memories of it. And then next, because other than a play, I'm also trying to read a short story collection every month. I read Beast and Beauty, Dangerous Tales by Soman Chainani, and this is basically him just interpreting different fairy tales and like, you know, his version of them, and he makes all of them very dark. What I really liked about this is he makes all of them very diverse. You know, so many of these fairy tales are European fairy tales, and I'm sure a lot of times when we see them printed, they are all white people, and it's very much European, and there were some of these fairy tales would have been from someplace else other than Europe possibly, but for the most part they were European fairy tales, and he makes it a very diverse cast. Like, I would say almost every single story had some kind of diversity, whether that was an ethnicity or LGBT characters or all kinds of different diversity. So I really enjoyed that part of it. I liked also that he made these very like kind of creepy and dark, because I think a lot of the Grimm's fairy tales originally were very dark. So I liked that approach, but some of these just fell really flat for me, and so that's why I gave it 3 stars. There were some that I really enjoyed. Like, for example, I'll show you some pictures in there and tell you which ones I really loved. So Little Red Riding Hood was one of my favorites. Some of these are a little graphic, so I can't show you the graphic ones. So yeah, that was Little Red Riding Hood was one of my favorites. And they also have like really pretty pictures at the beginning of each of them for Peter Pan. I liked Peter Pan too. So there were some that I really enjoyed and thought his twist on the fairy tale was good. Like, he was still maintaining the original integrity of the story, but making it more diverse, making it more interesting, more dark. I liked those. And then other ones I was like, this isn't even really a retelling of the original. Like, I felt like the Sleeping Beauty was not Sleeping Beauty at all, and it wasn't one I enjoyed at all. I'll talk about that more in my Sleeping Beauty video if you want to hear exactly why I think it wasn't Sleeping Beauty. But yeah, there were some of them I didn't really like think were really retellings. They were almost like new fairy tales, and then other ones didn't put much of a twist on the story at all. So then I was like, well, what is the point of that if there's not any kind of reinterpretation at all? So yeah, it was just a 3-star. I still thought it was a fun read, but not necessarily my favorite of retelling of fairy tales. And then next is a book that we read as part of school. It is the Barefoot Book of Stories from the Opera, and this is basically where they'll give information about the composer of a famous opera. So this is the Magic Flute. This is all like a summary of it and the composer, and then it actually goes through and tells the story of the opera, and with pictures and things like that, lots of artwork, and so that you can like kind of tell kids the story of the opera before you listen to it, so it makes more sense because a lot of opera is in different languages. So we did a study on opera and we read one of these. We would read the story, then what I did was I would pull clips of the opera off of YouTube, because sometimes you could find either a trailer that the opera company did for the performance, or maybe they just did a clip of like one of the songs, and I would show her that so she could see it on the stage with all the like lighting and the costuming and the makeup and the facial expressions and the body language, because I think that's really important, and enjoying the opera is like seeing the stage production of it. So we would watch little clips of that, and then we would like just put the opera on in the background to kind of get familiar with the music. And I really appreciate this book because my daughter has been loving it. Like, my 7-year-old is going around the house singing the Queen of Night aria from the Magic Flute, like, for the past 3 weeks. So I'm glad that this is resources out there to introduce kids to the opera and getting them familiar with the stories behind the performances. But I didn't always love the writing of these. So some of them were really good and fun and enjoyable to read, and then other ones I would get like lost in the story. And I don't know if that's just the way that the author was like taking a, possibly 3-hour-long opera and condensing it down into 5 pages of text, if that's what it was. But then other ones would be good, but then there would be some that I'm like, I have no idea what's happening. And it was even stories that I knew, like, I'm trying to think of which one. Oh, so one of them is the like Cinderella one, which is La Cenerentola, because it's in Italian. And that one, it's a Cinderella story. And I was like, how is my daughter getting this? Because I am confused. I have no idea what's happening in this story. And it's Cinderella. So that was like why I was like, okay, I know this isn't a convoluted story. I know this story, but the way it's written just didn't flow well with the narrative. So that's why it's 3 stars. Some of these were really excellent. I love it as a resource to introduce children or even adults to the opera and see the stories behind them. But I don't think it was always well written. The favorite ones we had, my daughter's favorite one, I think, was Hansel and Gretel. Like, she was like on the edge of our seat. We hadn't read the fairy tale before, so when we were reading the story, my mom called, FaceTimed in the middle of it, and she's like, Grandma, I have to go back and find out the end of my story. So she would really like that. My favorite was probably Orpheus and Eurydice, because one, I'm reading a lot of Greek mythology and I love that story, but at the same time, it wasn't necessarily just the story. It was the fact that after reading that, when we listened to the opera, that opera has like beautifully haunting music. So I think combining those two together made it my favorite. So if you want to learn more about the stories behind certain operas, I would recommend it. I just don't think it's the best written thing that it could be. It wasn't written as well as I think it could have been. Going along those lines, I have the Odyssey, which it doesn't even say on the front who retells it. It just says retold from the epic poem by Homer, but the illustrations are from Manuela Adreani, and she's a pretty popular illustrator, has illustrated a lot of like fairy tale retellings and other kind of things like that. So that's why I picked it up, was to have like kind of a big illustrated version of this. This does have a lot of text on a page, so it's not like necessarily a small picture book. So I didn't actually read this to my daughter, I just read it myself. And so the artwork was probably a pretty high rating. Sorry, this is a huge book. So the artwork I would rate pretty high, but the story, whoever retold the story, I didn't really think did an absolutely great job of condensing it. And you know, some people might say it's just because he's condensing this huge, or they are condensing this huge epic into a, you know, 80-page picture book kind of format. But we read like several different picture book versions of the Odyssey for school, and this was my least favorite. I just don't think the writing in this one was great. Even getting to the end, I was like, okay, yeah, like it just, I think what this focuses on more is the relationship between Odysseus and Telemachus, and kind of like following Telemachus, you know, searching for his father and upset that his father, you know, hasn't returned, and then their reunion and things like that. Telemachus is Odysseus' son, if you didn't know. So their relationship, and there's hardly any like time spent with Odysseus on his journey. So like that's the exciting part of the journey, and maybe you disagree, maybe you'd rather have the like family dynamics, but for me, I want to like see him, you know, encounter the sirens and the sea monsters. And there was like one paragraph of each of those things, and then like pages and pages of the family stuff. And I want both of those in equal measure, is what I'm saying. It's not that I want more of the sea monsters and less of the family. I want them both equally. This could have been even, I mean, it's not that thick. It could have been 20 more pages, so that the adventure on the water could have had more time, and it still wouldn't have been too big of a picture book, I think. It just wasn't as good as I was expecting it to be, so 3 stars. I'll still keep it, because when my kids get a little older, it is like child appropriate level for the story of the Odyssey. Like there's not a lot of graphic stuff, like the pictures are not graphic and the writing isn't very graphic, so I'm going to keep it around for my kids, but I don't know that I would necessarily revisit that a lot. Next is a group read I did. I joined in the group read of Celebration of Discipline by Richard J. Foster. This was a bunch of people read this together. It's a Christian nonfiction. We did it with Krista on her channel, Books and Jams, so if you want to see the live shows, you can check them out on her channel. And this one was one that I gave it 3 stars because there was stuff about this I really enjoyed. I guess I should tell you what this is about. So basically, he lays out these different disciplines that you can do, spiritual disciplines. So things like meditation and prayer and fasting, more outward things like simplicity and service, and things like confession and worship. So he's gone through all of these different disciplines and just talking about why we should use those disciplines as Christians, and like what benefit they have in our spiritual life. And then he gives like some kind of concrete like ways to like achieve those or do them. So that's what this is. And there were times when it was great and I was highlighting, like there were some chapters I was highlighting a ton, and I was like, oh, this is really informative, it's really helping me, and like I'm getting a lot out of it. And then there were like other chapters where I didn't highlight a single thing, and I was like, I didn't really get anything out of this chapter. So it was just a very uneven read for me. I still am perfectly glad that I read it, and I'm glad I did it as the group read with the people. I enjoyed participating in the live shows and listening to the ones that I wasn't involved in. And so I'm glad I read this, but I'm giving it 3 stars because, like a lot of nonfiction, there was things that I got out of it and things that just weren't for me. And that's fine. I would still recommend it if it's something that you're interested in. And then my last 3-star, which almost got a DNF, and that was Inkspell by Cornelia Funke. She's the writer of the Inkheart trilogy. This is the 2nd book in that series. And I had read all 3 of these back when they came out, so quite a while ago. And I enjoyed them enough that I kept them, but I don't really remember much about them. So I reread Inkheart last year, gave it 3 stars. Then I reread this one, and I'm giving it 3 stars, but it's a very like hesitant 3 stars, like maybe a 2, almost DNF'd it several times. Like, there were a lot of times I'm like, I should just put this down. But it's just like, it's too long. Pretty much is my complaint about this. This is, you know, like a story about a girl and her father who can like read things out of books or read people in books, you know, either way. And, you know, we can't really talk exactly about what's happening in this story because it all is revolved around events of the first book. But that's basically it. Just, it's a portal fantasy. They're going in and out of this world, the Inkheart world. And what I like about this is I like a lot of the characters that are in Inkheart, like the submersion into that world. But I just think the plot moves so slow, and probably, this is what, like 700 pages, 650 pages. And I think at least 100 to 200 pages could have been cut out, and it would have been a lot more enjoyable, because there was like a lot of times I was really invested, like the very beginning and the very end I was completely invested, but it was like a 300-page slog in the middle that I just kept thinking I was gonna quit. But I was like, no, let's just make it to the end. And I was listening to it on audiobook, so that's probably why. If I had just been reading it, I probably would have just put it down. But having it in my ears and speeding up the volume, or speeding up the speed, you know what I mean, making it go faster, I was able to get through it. But I don't know if I'm gonna read the last one. Like, I feel like I should finish it off because I own the third one and I could just put it on audiobook. But what's the point if I gave them both 3 stars and I barely finished this one? So what do you think? Do you think I should just finish off the trilogy, or do you think I should just move on and pass these off to somebody else? Because some people really love this series, and there are some things to love about them. Like I said, the characters, and there's sometimes in the writing that I want to like take the quotes and pull them out and put them on my wall. Like, she does have some beautiful writing. I just think that these could have used a bigger edit, and that's it. Like, if they had just been edited down more, I probably would have liked it. I also didn't like the like love story. Like, there's our main character, I think she's like 13, and they keep talking about her being in love with this other character, or this other character being in love with her. And I'm like, you can just have a crush on somebody or like them. We don't have to like insinuate that they are in love and going to be like together forever when they are like lower age teenagers. So that bothered me because it's a lot. It's like so many times, like everybody in her life is all like, you're in love with him, he's in love with you. And I'm like, they are so young. Can we stop? Like, this is a middle grade book. Let's not talk about love like that. Like, I mean, I could see like caring for somebody and all this stuff, but do we have to like talk about it as like romantic love with kids that age? Like, that was bothering me too. So I don't know. We'll see if I finish off that series. I might just like unhaul them all and call it good, and should have just left it in the past. And then my last book is the only 2-star, and that is The Midnight Library by Matt Haig. And this one was a big disappointment because this was like a lot of people's favorite books. The year it came out, was that last year or 2 years ago? And so many people love Matt Haig. And I've read 3 of his books. The first one was one of his nonfiction books. I don't remember what's that, Reasons to Stay Alive, is that what it was called? And I loved that one, gave it 5 stars. Then I read The Humans, gave it 3 stars. Which everybody loves The Humans, it seems like, that reads it. I gave it 3 stars. A lot of people love this one. I gave it 2 stars. So I think I just don't get along with his fiction, but I liked his nonfiction. So I might try another one of his nonfictions, and think that maybe the thing is that this book feels like one of his nonfictions, but putting it into a fiction book doesn't really work for me. So it's like self-help in the form of a fictional story. And this is about a woman who at the beginning is like, everything's kind of going wrong in her life. She's been struggling a lot with her mental health, and then she's in this place between life and death, and in that place is the Midnight Library, where she gets to like relive different lives, try out different lives, that if she had made different decisions, what would have happened. So it's like her trying different types of things. And I think it's pretty obvious from the beginning what's going to happen in the end of this book. Or at least I felt like it was very obvious. And so then I'm like, why am I spending all this time just so you can... And it just felt like there was a character in the Midnight Library, like there's a librarian, and I felt like her whole point was to just be a self-help guru talking to the main character. And yeah, it didn't work for me as a novel. I will try one more of his nonfiction books, and if I don't enjoy that, then I'm giving up on Matt Haig, but I definitely think I'm done with his fiction. Like, I just don't think his fiction is for me. Those are all the books that I read in the second half of February. Like I said, February was not my reading month. I read a lot of stuff, but I didn't read a lot of like really high quality books for me, like things that were my taste. But we are going into middle grade March now, and already I'm loving the first things that I'm reading in March. So I hope that this will be a much better month coming up. So my next wrap up will hopefully have a lot more like 4 and 5 stars. Let me know if you've read any of these, if you feel differently from me. I don't mind having discussions. A lot of these were popular books that other people like more than me, and that's fine. Let's have a chat about it. And that's it for me, and I'll see you next time. Bye.